Fear thou not, for I am with thee. Be not dismayed, for I am thy God. I will strengthen thee. Yea, I will help thee. Yea, I will uphold thee with the right hand of my righteousness. Isaiah 41:10. 3 verbs. The single most quoted promise in the Old Testament, and you memorized it. You never actually read it. That verse matters to you. It has earned that. Fear not is not telling you to stop being afraid. The Hebrew is not offering safety. It is not offering rescue. It is not offering the removal of what frightens you. It is offering something else entirely. Something that does not break when the hardship stays. Something that does not need the pain to stop before the promise holds. That is what the Hebrew has been carrying this entire time, and no one taught you to hear it. And what it offers is sturdier than the promise you memorized. Every word in that verse is doing something the English does not show you. So why does the most memorized safety verse in Scripture contain no verb for safety? What are those 3 verbs actually doing if they are not promising protection? And what changes when you hear the verse with the words the Hebrew always used instead of the ones the English gave you? That is what we are walking into now. Verb by verb, word by word. Starting with a word, the English buried so deep, most readers have never seen what it actually says. Every time God says fear not in Scripture, something dangerous is either arriving or already present. That pattern never breaks. Not once across the entire canon. God does not say fear not when nothing is wrong. He says it precisely when everything is wrong. And the moment you see that, the phrase stops sounding like a greeting card and starts sounding like a field command issued under fire. Abram hears fear not in Genesis 15, the night before a covenant that will cost him everything familiar. He is old. He is childless. The promise sounds impossible. And in that gap between impossible and promised, God says, Al-Tira, do not fear. Isaac hears it in Genesis 26, while living in hostile territory among people who want what he has. Joshua hears it in Joshua chapter 1, standing at the edge of the Jordan, looking at fortified cities and armies he cannot outfight. God does not remove a single one of them before telling Joshua to cross. Mary hears it from Gabriel in Luke 1. The angel has just told her that her life is about to become something she did not choose, something she cannot explain to anyone who loves her. The shepherds hear it under a sky that has split open. John hears it in Revelation 1, face down on the ground before a figure so bright he cannot stand. The pattern is plain. Fear not does not arrive when the danger has passed. It arrives when the danger is present. It does not mean nothing bad will happen. It means fear is not to govern your perception or your next step while the bad thing is happening. And Isaiah 41 is no exception. This verse does not sit inside a lullaby. It sits inside a courtroom. The chapter opens with God summoning nations to trial. Idols are cross-examined. The question is who can be trusted. And then God turns from the courtroom to Israel and says, in verse 10, Al-Tira, do not fear. The command lands in the middle of a legal argument about who actually holds power. That is the room this verse was written for. Not a greeting card, a trial. Now, the Hebrew, the phrase is Al-Tira. Al is a prohibitive particle. In Hebrew grammar, al with an imperfect verb creates a direct negative command. This is not a wish, not a suggestion, not a sentiment for a decorative plaque. It is a prohibition. Do not do this. It carries the force of an order given to someone who is already in danger of doing exactly what is being forbidden. And then the companion phrase, what English translates as be not dismayed. The Hebrew word underneath is sha'ah, and sha'ah does not mean dismayed, not the way English uses that word. The root of sha'ah is tied to looking, gazing, fixing your attention somewhere. In this form and context, paired with Al-Tira, it carries the image of eyes casting around anxiously at what surrounds you, scanning for the next threat, fixating on the circumstance until the circumstance is the only thing you can see. English says dismayed. Hebrew says stop scattering your gaze. Stop letting your eyes be dragged in every direction by what you cannot control. Not grief, not sadness, not honest fear. The verse forbids the specific loss of orientation that happens when the threat becomes your entire field of vision. That is sha'ah, and it commands you to stop. But the verse does not leave you there. It diagnoses the scattering, and then it tells you what God does about it. The verse shifts. It stops telling you what not to do. It begins telling you what God will do. And the first verb is not what anyone expects. You have asked God to strengthen you. That prayer was never wrong. But what you were asking for was deeper than what the English let you hear. I will strengthen you. In English, this sounds like fuel, as if strength is a substance God pours in from the outside. The Hebrew word is amats, and amats does not mean supply. Amats means to be firm, to harden into resolve, to become courageous and alert at the interior level. It is not the addition of something you lack, it is the solidifying of something that was already inside you but had begun to shake. That is the difference. When Hebrew scripture uses amats, it appears in one specific kind of moment, the moment where someone must face what cannot be avoided. Not what might happen, what is certainly coming. And the clearest example is not in Isaiah, and here is where this verse reaches beyond itself. In Joshua chapter 1, verse 9, God says, "Be strong and of a good courage." The word underneath is amats, the same root, the same verb family. And the scene around Joshua is a man standing at the edge of a river he has to cross. On the other side, walled cities and armies that outnumber his own people. God does not clear the land before Joshua arrives. God does not flatten a single fortified wall in advance. God says, Amats, be firmed, be hardened into the resolve you will need for what is waiting on the other side of that water. Joshua walked into a land that was still hostile. Every city still stood, every army still waited. Not one had been removed. And the verb God gave him was not a verb of removal, it was a verb of interior fortification. Joshua did not receive a cleared road, he received a firmed spine. That is what I will strengthen you means in Isaiah 41 verse 10. God is not promising to remove what frightens you. He is promising to firm you so you do not collapse inside of it. The strengthening is not about your circumstances, it is about your structure. It acts on the part of you that shakes, the part that wants to look in every direction at once, the part that sha'ah was already naming 2 lines earlier. The scattering gaze and the firming verb are stitched into the same verse. The diagnosis and the first remedy sit side by side, but amats is only the first verb. The verse promises help next, and it is not the kind of help you expect. The chapter does not leave the promise abstract. Isaiah builds a case across the next 4 verses. The evidence, his own imagery repeating. The second verb is shorter, I will help thee. The word is Azar, not reassurance, not comfort, concrete aid. Direct, someone shows up, something gets done, but Azar does not name the form. No promise of prevention, no promise of repair. Help is certain, the shape is God's. Then the third verb, I will uphold you with the right hand of my righteousness. The word is Tamak, and Tamak does not mean rescue, it does not mean extract, it does not mean deliver from. Tamak means to hold, to support, to sustain under weight, not someone pulling you out of the water, someone holding your head above the surface while the water stays. The weight does not leave, the hand does not move. That is Tamak, sustained, pledged, constant, not one dramatic extraction, an ongoing grip that does not release. One more phrase, with the right hand of my righteousness, the right hand, yamin, the side of strength, the side of skill, the side of decisive action, not bare power, it is my righteousness, tzidki. The grip comes from God's faithfulness, God's covenant right action. The hand that holds is not arbitrary force, it is the righteous grip of someone who promised and does not break promises, and the chapter confirms its own image. Isaiah 41 verse 13. For I, the Lord thy God, will hold thy right hand, saying unto thee, Fear not, I will help thee. The hand grip returns 2 verses later. This is not a metaphor floating loose. It is repeated on purpose, structural. The chapter shows you the hand twice. Then verse 14. The language does not soften, it sharpens. Fear not, thou worm Jacob. Worm. God does not upgrade the listener. God does not say, Fear not, thou mighty warrior. God says, Worm. Weakness stays. Frailty stays named. God does not deny the worm. God grips the worm. The promise does not break when the hardship stays. That is the line the English never carried. Protect means the hardship has to leave for the promise to hold. Tamak means the grip holds while the hardship remains. And the chapter proves it by keeping the word worm in the same breath as the word help. All 3 verbs are now visible. So, what does the verse actually say when you hear them together? Read Isaiah 41:10 again. But hear what the Hebrew always said: do not be destabilized by dread. Do not scatter your gaze at what surrounds you. I am present. I am your God. I will firm your resolve. I will actively help you. I will hold you up under the weight with my faithful right hand. That is not a smaller promise. That is a sturdier one. A promise of protection requires a pain-free life to remain true. The moment suffering arrives and does not leave, the protection promise appears to fail. You prayed. The thing still happened. So the verse must have been wrong. But a promise of presence, of firmed resolve, of sustained grip underneath the weight. That promise does not need the suffering to leave in order to hold. It does not crack. The first time, life does not improve on schedule. It holds in the hospital room. It holds in the year that did not get easier. It holds precisely where the other reading would have already failed. Isaiah knew this, because 2 chapters later, in Isaiah 43, verses 1 and 2, the same prophetic voice says, "Fear not again." And this time, the text names fire and water explicitly. "When thou passest through the waters, I will be with thee. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned." Through, not around, not instead of, through the waters, through the fire. Same author, same formula, same God. Fear not does not mean nothing burns. It means you are held while the fire is hot. That preposition is Tamak in action. Through means the water does not leave. Through means the fire does not stop. The hand underneath does not let go while you pass. That is the shape of the help Azar promised. That is the firmness Amats was building toward. The 3 verbs do not work alone. They build a single structure. You are firmed, you are helped, you are held, and the holding continues for as long as the fire is hot. Not 1 second after it stops, for as long as it burns. If you have been measuring God's faithfulness by whether circumstances improved, this verse was never the one that promised improvement. What it promised was larger. What it promised does not expire when the report comes back wrong. Every Hebrew root in this study, every cross-reference, every lexicon receipt is available exclusively in the Watchman tier. That is the 3rd tier on the Join button below this video. Every word verified and waiting. You have carried this verse into rooms where nothing got better. This is the verse people whisper in waiting rooms and parking lots and at kitchen tables at hours no one should be awake. You know which hours. And every time the circumstance did not change, something inside the person holding this verse wondered whether it had failed, whether God had failed, whether fear not was a promise that broke under the weight of what actually happened. It did not break. It was misread, and the misread cost something real. Because every time the hardship stayed, the reader believed this verse had promised its removal. They interpreted the sustaining grip of God as the absence of God. That is what the wrong reading does. It turns the hand underneath you invisible. It makes the very thing you are being held by look like the thing that let you fall. The Hebrew never said the fire would not come. It said the hand would not move. The resolve would be firmed. The gaze would be steadied. The grip underneath would hold. None of that required the fire to stop burning. The promise was never conditional on comfort. It was conditional on God. The verse was never handing you a tool. It was handing you back to the Father. This week, when the fear rises, name the sha'ah. Name the scattered looking. Feel your eyes pulling toward every direction the threat might come from, and then speak back what the verse speaks. Not I am brave, not I am strong, I am held. Then read Isaiah 41, verses 10 through 14 as a single unit. Do not stop at verse 10. Read until you reach the worm. Read until you reach the hand. Notice that the chapter never once removes the difficulty. Notice that the grip never once lets go. That is how the Father works. Not by canceling the trial, by gripping you inside it. The full study notes for this passage, every Hebrew root, every receipt, every cross-reference are linked in the description below. The Watchman community walks these studies together week by week. The link is below this video. The verse was never trying to remove what frightens you. It was telling you who is underneath it, and he has not moved.